In this video, we're going to talk about managing the emotion of sadness. Hi, I'm Ron with LeadSkill. We develop tools and techniques to help people manage their emotions and lead people more effectively. So this series is part of the Working with Emotions series, and we're focusing on 8 core emotions. The emotion today that we're going to focus on is sadness. Sadness is an emotion that a lot of us really don't want to explore. It's usually associated overwhelmingly with being a negative emotion. And the fact is that it's more than just a negative emotion, although there are those parts of it. I've actually found that one of our tools, the emotions wheel, really helps us to get beyond just a monolithic, a one-dimensional view of sadness. Like when we say, I feel sad. Well, that's actually a huge step to just be able to acknowledge our sadness. But it's another big step to get beyond that and to expand our vocabulary a little bit more. So on the Working with Emotions wheel, we've got several other words that go with sadness that we can use to express ourselves. So it's down here in the dark blue portion of the wheel. And the 3 other words that come out alongside with sadness is I feel lonely, I feel depressed, I feel grief, or I feel grieved. And if you stop and think about each one of those and let them soak in just a little bit. I feel lonely, I feel grief, or I feel depressed. It kind of helps you see that each one of those has a little different spin on it, a different energy, and another dimension within it that kind of helps us access the fuller parts of what sadness is really about. Sadness is something that I think a lot of people have really struggled with, especially during the pandemic, 2020, 2021. It's been really tough. And so there's been a renewed emphasis on mental health and taking care of yourself, getting some help. And sadness has both a yin and a yang side of things. Now, we're much more familiar with the shadow side, the darker sides of sadness, like I feel lonely or I feel depressed. But even something like grief that we may think of as being negative, actually grief has an aspect that is very positive, and it's natural, it's healthy for us to acknowledge and to express our grief. Sadness is a feeling that I think we often don't want to explore or admit. I know that's true for myself. In fact, when I tried to look back and find recent memories or times in my life when I was really sad, I have to tell you, it's really hard for me to find them, even though I know the feeling and the experience of sadness very intimately. But just being able to articulate it or to remember it is really difficult. But there was a time that I could think about, and that's when my older son took off, left home for the first time, and it was about 2 years ago, and he actually went overseas to study in China. And I still remember we put him on the plane in Houston on his 17th birthday, and he took off. And in the next few weeks, there were just times when it really hit me. I wasn't expecting it, but it would just suddenly come over me, and I would feel this sense of grief is the best word for it, a sadness, that I missed him a lot. And I would think back to memories that we had together and the fact that we were in a different place now. The relationship was changing. It was going to be different from here on. I would see him again, I expected, but that still didn't change the fact that in the moment, I was experiencing sadness and grief. And so a few times I would just go up to my wife and say, I just feel sad. And she got it. She understood, because she's much better at experiencing this emotion and expressing it. And it was really helpful for me to have someone to share that with. And it's not like things changed right away. They didn't. I had to process through and make peace with the fact that the relationship was going in a new place, and what we had before isn't what I had now. And there was some grief about that, but it was worthwhile for me to go through that and process it alongside with someone else who could walk with me on that path. But as I explored a little bit further, I become aware that sadness has some constructive purposes in our life. And I want to explore those before we talk about the other side that's often a lot more common to us and that we have to work on and to deal with, to manage. So right in the middle of depression and loneliness is grief. And I would say that grief is the part of sadness that is sending us some pretty important information. When we are feeling grief, when we're going through a time or a season of grief, it's telling us that there has been a significant change. In fact, there's loss. We've lost something. Or there has been a conclusion. Something has ended. And we may not be ready for the fact of facing that it's over, it's ended. And so we grieve in order to make that transition, in order to pass to what's next in our life. And sometimes we don't want to make that transition. We don't want to pass. We want to enjoy, and we think that we're betraying the good experiences and the feelings in the relationship and what we had in the past. And therefore we postpone the grief. We resist it. So one aspect of experiencing sadness and acknowledging that we are having grief is to be able to identify what has been lost. What do I feel a sense of loss about? And how can I acknowledge that whole experience, that relationship that has been lost? And how can I both give thanks for it and also sincerely grieve over the end? It's not that we want to grieve in order to get to what's next. This is not an in order to for going on to something else. It's just a matter of taking the time right now, in the present, and dealing with the emotion that often we don't seem to have control over, or it comes up, like I was sharing, in waves, and we just don't know where it came from or where the next wave, when it's going to come and wash over us. But when it does, we just experience it and acknowledge it instead of fighting it. In the case of thinking about my son and his departure, him going off to school overseas and being away from us, I was dealing with the loss of just having him around on a daily basis, having the conversations, going on walks together, and just having his presence around. And I did feel that sense of loss. And of course we had conversations on the phone. It wasn't the same. They weren't as frequent. It wasn't the same as having a person physically present, their energy with you in the room, and just that immediacy. But in acknowledging the loss and going through the grief and not resisting it, I was able to be with the sadness. There's another aspect of sadness that we're looking at, which is loneliness. Loneliness is something that we're all experiencing. We've all gone through it. We are all going through it on a regular basis. But of course, that doesn't give us comfort for me to say that we're all going through loneliness, because the fact is, I feel my loneliness in a very intensely personal way. And I get the impression looking out that other people are not lonely like I am. They don't have the feelings of loneliness. And part of this is for us to just feel our loneliness and don't project onto other people, or don't deny that other people might be having their own type of loneliness, regardless of what I see on the outward appearance, because loneliness often hides behind a mask in which we have a smile and we're nodding and we're getting through the day, and inside we're just feeling that loneliness. It's gnawing at us. Another expression of sadness that I mentioned is depressed. I feel depressed. So I want to be clear. Depression is something that is a common feeling for many people without it necessarily becoming a clinical type of persistent depression. And I am also clear, if you have a deep and overwhelming, a persistent sense of depression, get some professional help. Whether it is medication or therapy or a combination of different approaches, getting the right kind of help and not just trying to deal with it or cheer up and get over it. Those are not helpful, and it's not going to make the depression go away, especially if there are suicidal ideas or thoughts that come up, especially if the depression is crippling or it just destabilizes and disables you, paralyzes you. It's time to get some help. And so I'm not talking about that clinical depression here, but I am wanting to make everyone more aware and more free to experience the fact that depression is a common experience, even without being clinical. And so let's take a moment to think about it. What is depression? Even the word itself gives us a clue. Think about it. There's a depression. We feel pressed in. We feel under the weight. We feel heaviness. We're turned inward. And the depression that I'm talking about, the feeling of depression, the emotions of depression, even if they're not long-lasting, they can really be intense. They can grab hold of us. They can rob us of the motivation to do the things that we enjoy, that give life our meaning and purpose. My wife has battled with depression, and that wasn't something that I was immediately aware of in our marriage, in the early years especially. So when she said it, she felt sad. And later on, when she had more freedom to express that she was actually feeling depression or even a suicidal thought, at first I resisted it and fought it or just tried to tune it out because I didn't want to accept that she really had that serious of a depression. And so I was not very supportive. It wasn't helpful to her at all, and it wasn't very compassionate or empathetic of me. One of my many failures. Over time, I learned that there are different varieties and different levels of depression. It can just be a great gift sometimes to just sit with someone, not even talking, but just to be present with them and just to be okay in the silence. And so my wife and I have had many times that we sit on the sofa next to each other and we're just quiet. We're not always having to talk. I learned I don't have to try to fix anything. And if she's expressing herself, it's something I can listen to and not try to argue with or fix or to cheer up, but just to listen, just to understand, just to be with. Another thing that is helpful for going through the season or the experience of depression is getting a journal, getting something that you can physically write your thoughts down on, and just putting it up, pouring it out, putting it on the printed page, using a pen and writing out your feelings and your thoughts. That can be a very helpful way to process through feelings of sadness, not just depression, but loneliness, grief, depression, the full variety of sad thoughts. It's a very good practice, is to take time to write out in a journal what you're feeling, what you're thinking, and what's going on in life, and just to observe it, just to acknowledge it, just to get it out, and not to keep it inside. If you're in this situation where you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling really deep in the depths, or even thoughts of suicide have come up for you, reach out, get some help, call for help, call the suicide hotline, call for someone who is trained to walk with you into mental health and mental wellness. It will really make a difference. And there's no reason to suffer in silence and suffer alone. Share it with someone else. Let them walk with you in your sadness. How do we acknowledge feeling depressed or feeling sad? One of the phrases that is really good to anchor us is very simple but powerful if we will take it into our bones. And it's this: it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to not be okay. It's important that we acknowledge that we're not okay right now. And that's okay that we're not all put together, that we're not all together, that we're feeling sad, we're feeling depressed. But there's also another important follow-up to that. But I will be okay. It's okay to not be okay, but that's okay. I don't know how long this is going to last, whether it's going to be over in the next minute, whether it's going to take an hour, whether it's going to take a day, months later, years later. I'm not feeling okay. I'm not feeling right about this, but that's okay, because I'm going to be okay. I want you to grab hold of that truth. Like someone who has a life preserver being thrown to them. They're out on the ocean, in the dark, in a storm, and just feeling overwhelmed. And here comes the life preserver. Something hits you and you grab hold of it and almost instinctively, and then you realize like, oh, I'm not okay. I'm not feeling okay. But that's okay. It's going to be okay. Sadness is not forever. Sadness is not forever. And sadness is not all that there is of life. There is more to life. There's more to experience. And the emotions wheel reminds us of some of the other emotions. I hope that you will keep working with your emotions, and there are some additional tools that you can. I've showed you the working with emotions wheel that we have here. You can get a copy of that, actually a product or one of our digital downloads in the links below, so check those out. And I really hope that we can actually support one another and encourage each other. Get some help and let other people walk with you and carry the burden. Thanks for watching the video. I look forward to visiting with you some more about working with emotions in this series.